We're witnessing something in the United States that was never meant to happen. The budget meal has stopped being budget friendly. For generations, fast food, particularly McDonald's, served as America's economic backstop. It represented the destination when money ran tight, when groceries ran out, or when dining at an actual restaurant wasn't financially feasible. But as 2025 draws to a close, that entire system has shattered. McDonald's pricing has accelerated well beyond wage growth, with fast food inflation outpacing nearly every other consumer spending category. A Big Mac that traditionally stayed well under $5 now approaches 6 across the nation, pushing past 7 in urban centers. Lower earning demographics have reduced their visits by approximately 10% throughout the fast food industry, while wealthier patrons increasingly dominate customer traffic. What functioned as an economical option has transformed into a discretionary splurge, viewed as a premium purchase by over 80% of Americans surveyed. And the issue extends beyond cost alone. Consumers are drained. They're frustrated with touchscreens, exhausted by mobile applications, annoyed by artificial intelligence voice systems, weary of spending more while getting less. Customer dissatisfaction has reached unprecedented levels, with McDonald's now holding the lowest satisfaction rating among prominent chains. By this analysis's conclusion, you'll grasp why America's most accessible meal has turned inaccessible, and why this transformation reveals far more about our economic reality than simple price adjustments suggest. For multiple generations, McDonald's represented more than just a restaurant chain. It stood as a measure of American economic accessibility. The principle was straightforward. Regardless of economic conditions, whether fuel costs soared, housing payments increased, or food prices became volatile, you could reliably purchase a reasonable meal at McDonald's without financial anxiety. But approaching late 2025, that implicit agreement has essentially dissolved. The most obvious indicator lies in the numbers. Throughout America, the typical Big Mac now ranges between $5.69 and slightly above $6, with certain metropolitan regions climbing past 7. And while that figure itself might not appear devastating, the rate of escalation hits hardest. From 2019 forward, McDonald's pricing has jumped roughly 40%. Meanwhile, compensation for numerous service industry and working class employees has failed to match genuine living costs. Understanding what occurs when restaurant prices outrun earnings doesn't require financial expertise. Families stop visiting, and that's precisely what's unfolding across the sector. Based on internal data from several major chains, lower income customer traffic has dropped by nearly 10%. Middle-class visits are retreating as well, with only affluent consumers expanding as a percentage of overall visits. This represents an unprecedented phenomenon in fast food history. These establishments were constructed around volume, massive flows of ordinary Americans purchasing something quick, inexpensive, and reliable. When your primary customer base withdraws, the fundamental business model begins crumbling. But affordability isn't the sole victim here. The entire encounter has transformed. What previously involved a straightforward walk-in, order, and departure now demands navigating touchscreens, mobile platforms, rewards programs, and occasionally even computerized voices at drive-through windows. What once felt streamlined now resembles a framework engineered to extract maximum revenue from customers receiving diminished value. And here's what should alarm everyone. McDonald's isn't an outlier. It's the warning signal for an economy where necessities cost more, earnings fall behind, and everyday Americans silently abandon things they previously considered standard. Because the genuine question isn't merely why McDonald's elevated prices, but why they believed they had zero alternatives. And that leads us to the next dimension of this narrative. To comprehend why McDonald's pricing surged so dramatically, you must look behind operations, not into food preparation, but into the financial reality of operating a fast food empire in 2025. Because the reality is straightforward. McDonald's didn't raise its pricing from corporate greed. It raised them from economic necessity. The initial pressure comes from raw materials. Beef costs have climbed steadily across multiple years, driven by supply constraints, weather-related shortages, and elevated shipping expenses. Chicken follows a similar trajectory. When your international menu relies on 2 protein sources, both becoming costlier, the financial impact is immediate and unavoidable. Even French fries, arguably America's most recognizable side item, have grown more expensive due to increased farming inputs and distribution challenges. Labor represents the next factor. Numerous states implemented minimum wage increases throughout 2024 and 2025, and even in locations without legislative changes, employment markets tightened sufficiently to force compensation increases. Fast food employment might lack prestige, but it remains vital. and keeping staff now demands significantly higher investment than several years prior. When an individual location requires dozens of employees, even moderate wage growth translates into substantial expense. Then comes the operational revolution. McDonald's has invested billions in digital systems, self-service touchscreens, smartphone applications, customer loyalty infrastructure, and AI-enhanced ordering technology. These innovations aren't cost-free. They demand ongoing software creation, equipment deployment, upkeep, and digital security. The commitment was that automation would optimize processes, minimize errors, and maintain customer flow. But at least initially, the transition has increased expenses, not decreased them. Finally, franchise operators who manage most McDonald's restaurants confront their own inflation challenges, increasing property costs, utilities, insurance coverage, equipment expenses, and municipal taxes. These business owners establish pricing within corporate parameters, meaning increases fluctuate between cities and frequently mirror local economic circumstances rather than corporate directives. All these forces converge in one location: the pricing display. When beef, labor, property, and technology simultaneously become more expensive, McDonald's has only one remaining option: pricing adjustments. But increasing prices carries a penalty. As expenses rise, customers disappear, and that transition is already reshaping the fast food environment. The most telling aspect of this narrative isn't that McDonald's increased prices, it's that Americans finally rejected them. For decades, fast food represented the one sector where consumers seldom objected. Groceries could turn expensive, fuel could spike, housing could jump hundreds monthly, but McDonald's remained the safety net, the value option, the affordable middle ground. The I can still manage this selection when everything else seemed beyond reach. Not today. By late 2025, lower-income patrons, once fast food's core audience, decreased their visits by nearly double digits. Middle-class households adopted similar patterns. And the most paradoxical development is this: wealthy customers now constitute an expanding portion of fast food traffic. That demonstrates how inverted the economics have turned. The exact demographic fast food was designed for is being excluded, while those who don't financially need it are the ones sustaining business levels. But this shift transcends money alone. It involves exhaustion. 80% of Americans report fast food no longer feels economical. Many claim it's no longer quick. The implementation of applications, mobile promotions, digital discounts, touchscreens, reward points, and AI ordering has converted a basic transaction into a cognitive burden. You're not simply purchasing a sandwich, you're decoding a system. And if you avoid the application, you risk spending noticeably more than the digital promotion beside it. This sensation of weariness is sparking a silent consumer uprising. More households are preparing food at home, grocery expenditure is climbing, people are planning meals, cooking in bulk, or extending leftovers in ways they previously ignored. Some aren't reducing consumption by choice, but by financial necessity. When every living category, housing, utilities, insurance, transportation, consumes a larger budget portion, fast food becomes among the first casualties. And that's the inflection point. When millions of Americans concurrently determine that fast food is no longer justified, the industry doesn't merely decelerate, it transforms. And to truly comprehend why this transformation is accelerating, you must examine beyond the restaurant and into the employment market itself. If fast food has grown too costly for millions of Americans, it's not simply because pricing increased, it's because earnings didn't. By late 2025, the American employment market has entered what numerous economists privately term a great hiring freeze. It isn't a collapse. It isn't a recession officially. It's something more subtle and in numerous ways more destructive. A sustained slowdown where job availability contracts, new prospects stall, and workers feel professionally trapped. The statistics reveal the situation. Job openings have declined to their lowest points in nearly a decade. Private employment even slipped into negative figures at various points throughout the year, with tens of thousands of positions vanishing monthly. Technically, wages continue rising around 4% annually, but after adjusting for inflation in housing, groceries, utilities, and particularly dining out, many workers effectively earned less than previously. Their buying power has deteriorated, even if their paycheck appears marginally larger. Simultaneously, financial stress is escalating. Credit card debt has climbed to historic peaks. Savings rates remain near post-pandemic minimums. Housing consumes an increasing income share. And essential costs from insurance to child care continue straining family budgets. For millions of households, the buffer between stability and struggle has disappeared. This climate inevitably transforms consumer patterns. When workers lack employment confidence, they eliminate discretionary spending. They cancel subscriptions. They abandon entertainment. They select supermarket meals over drive-through windows. They postpone vehicle maintenance, eliminate small indulgences, and monitor every dollar more rigorously. Fast food transitions from convenience to consideration. And here's the underappreciated element: uncertainty carries psychological expense. When people feel unstable regarding employment, they reconsider everything. The choice to bypass McDonald's isn't merely about $6, it's about preserving whatever financial security remains. But within that instability exists a surprising pattern, one reshaping the American workforce completely. And it explains why so many people are abandoning conventional spending behaviors entirely. When the traditional employment market freezes, Americans don't simply wait passively, they evolve. And in 2025, evolution has manifested as a nationwide shift toward independent work, contract employment, and supplemental income streams. Not because people aspire toward entrepreneurship, but because the system provides limited options. Private employment data reveals a distinct pattern. Whenever job availability tightens, independent contracting expands. That pattern has intensified across the previous 2 years. Compared with pre-pandemic baseline, independent contractor numbers have increased by nearly 50%. Early career. Professionals who traditionally relied on established career trajectories now represent the fastest expanding demographic, shifting toward freelance work, gig economy platforms, temporary contracts, and small digital businesses. For many, it's less about aspiration and more about necessity. If the market won't deliver stability, they construct their own. But this transition also modifies spending behavior. Freelancers experience income fluctuation, unpredictable costs, and continuous cash flow management needs. During strong months, they might indulge in a fast food purchase. During difficult months, every dollar matters. That financial volatility teaches a practice most traditional employees never developed: spending conservatively even when resources are available because future months might differ. And then there's the mindset transformation. Operating your own income stream, whether through transportation services, food delivery, creative design, education services, or online commerce, demands a new accountability level. You assess every purchase not just as a buyer, but as a small business manager. You question, is this justified? Does this provide value? Is there a more economical alternative? Fast food, with its climbing prices and declining value, rarely satisfies that evaluation. Simultaneously, entrepreneurship exposes people to a comprehensive economic view. They recognize rising expenses. They recognize deteriorating service quality. They recognize inefficiencies that large corporations frequently miss or disregard. As more Americans exit traditional employment, their acceptance of overpriced and underperforming services decreases sharply. This represents the cultural shift. Consumers are no longer passive. They are becoming evaluative, questioning, and value-focused. And that perspective is accelerating a much deeper economic transition, one that's now affecting entire industries concurrently. Because while individuals are evolving, several critical American economic sectors are quietly entering recession. If you expand perspective from McDonald's, from fast food, and even from the employment market, a sharper and more troubling image materializes. Multiple foundations of the American economy are weakening simultaneously, not collapsing, just softening in ways that gradually diminish confidence and expenditure. Economists label it a rolling recession where each sector experiences its turn, contracting, never severely enough to declare an official downturn, but sufficiently for everyday Americans to experience the impact. Housing represents the first and most apparent. Residential development has retreated significantly. Construction companies are holding excess inventory. New construction permits are falling, and several building firms have quietly reduced their workforce. This isn't the boom-bust pattern of the early 2000s. It's something more gradual and more fundamental. Costly financing and reduced demand are strangling progress. Commercial property isn't performing any better. Office vacancy percentages remain at or near historic highs, as remote and flexible work continue transforming company operations. Sector investment has declined for consecutive quarters, and developers are postponing or completely abandoning projects that once would have immediately commenced. Restaurants and dining services, ironically the very sector Americans rely on for normality, are also displaying pressure. Profit margins are compressing, closures are increasing, and businesses face a devastating combination of higher compensation, elevated food expenses, and customers who are visiting less frequently. Even established chains are eliminating locations that no longer generate financial returns. Government employment is shrinking too. Federal departments have suspended hiring, state and municipal budgets are constricting, and public sector terminations are becoming progressively common in areas where tax income can't match declining property assessments. Meanwhile, freight and transportation volumes are declining, indicating broader weakness in product demand. Extraction and timber operations are slowing as construction cools, and higher education continues confronting declining attendance, financial pressure, and personnel reductions. None of these sectors independently generates a crisis, but collectively they create a quiet burden on the national sentiment, a background force that restricts household budgets and diminishes consumer confidence. And when people lose confidence, the initial indicator appears in how they engage with businesses. Which brings us to America's latest crisis, the breakdown of customer experience. If rising pricing and contracting earnings explain what is occurring to fast food, declining service explains why consumers are finally departing. By late 2025, the United States is experiencing a complete customer experience crisis, one that spans every industry from aviation to banking to retail, but manifests most painfully in everyday interactions like ordering a burger. The evidence is direct. 77% of Americans encountered a significant product or service issue within the previous 12 months, the highest percentage ever documented. Nearly 70% report that resolving an issue now demands high effort, meaning extended waits, confusing systems, unhelpful automated responses, and endless digital circles before contacting an actual person. Throughout all sectors, customer satisfaction has been declining for 4 consecutive years, reaching historic minimums in 2025. Fast food has become the epicenter for this frustration. What previously was quick, personal, and relatively straightforward has become heavily digitized and frequently impersonal. You're directed into applications, into touchscreen ordering, into scanning codes, into joining reward programs just to receive a standard price. Even the drive-thru, once the emblem of convenience, is progressively automated and not always effectively. AI ordering remains inconsistent, touchscreens malfunction or perplex customers, and reduced in-location staffing means fewer people available to correct errors when they occur. This isn't merely inconvenience, it's trust deterioration. When customers feel compelled into systems they didn't request or feel like they're performing more labor than the staff, resentment accumulates. And in a high-expense environment, frustration translates directly into lost patronage. Why spend more for a diminished experience? That's precisely what's occurring to McDonald's and the broader fast food industry. The chain now holds last place among major brands in national customer satisfaction measurements. And consumers are responding the only method they can, by spending less, visiting less, and seeking alternatives. But all these elements, pricing, earnings, confidence, service quality, ultimately indicate a much larger question. Is fast food experiencing a temporary recalibration? Or is this the start of a long-term fundamental decline? For decades, the fast food operational model was constructed on 3 unshakable foundations: low pricing, high volume, and quick, reliable service. Those foundations sustained the industry through recessions, inflation periods, and evolving cultural movements. But by the conclusion of 2025, all 3 are experiencing pressure at the identical moment, a rare alignment that raises a challenging question. Is fast food undergoing a temporary correction, or is this the beginning of a long-term structural decline? Begin with pricing. In a robust economy, customers accept modest increases, but when prices escalate faster than earnings, particularly for the working demographic, the psychological value connection fractures. A $6 Big Mac isn't simply a menu modification, it's an indication that something fundamental has transformed in America's expense framework. Once consumers perceive that disconnect, recovering them becomes extraordinarily challenging. Then there's volume. Fast food's advantage was always customer traffic. Wealthy customers cannot compensate for the departure of millions of lower and middle-earning diners. Volume losses damage margins, compel franchises to elevate prices even further, and accelerate the very decline they're attempting to solve. Additionally, convenience, the industry's foundation, is becoming a weakness. Digital ordering was intended to optimize operations. Instead, it introduced obstacles, confusion, and a sense of disconnection. Customers don't want to decode apps, touchscreens, or AI systems just to order the identical items they've consumed for years. When the encounter stops feeling effortless, the category loses its core identity. Combine all these with broader economic challenges, weak employment, rising obligations, sectoral slowdown, shrinking confidence, and fast food positions itself not as an economical alternative, but as another budget item. Families scrutinize during tight periods. This doesn't mean McDonald's or its competitors are finished. They are influential brands with substantial resources. But the period when fast food automatically accommodated every American budget is disappearing. And unless the industry reinvents its value offering, convenience framework, and customer encounter, the coming decade may appear vastly different from the previous. Ultimately, the narrative of McDonald's is simply the narrative of America in 2025. Pricing climbed, earnings stretched thin, and the everyday conveniences people once relied upon moved beyond reach. Fast food didn't collapse suddenly. It transformed gradually, driven by expense pressures, undermined by a fragile employment market, and strained by a digital-first encounter that many never requested. The outcome is a nation where $6 for a basic meal feels unjustified. Not because the amount is startling, but because the worth is absent. And yet, this moment isn't solely about frustration. It's also a transformation point. Consumers are reasoning differently, spending differently, and expecting something superior to what they've been receiving. The question now is straightforward. Has fast food changed permanently, or will it rediscover a path back to the function it once served? If this analysis helped you understand the larger picture, stay engaged because the forces reshaping America's daily reality are far from concluded.